Get it mounted, and then we'll move on to connecting all the wires up. Okay, so to strip this wire off, and I'm going to put a ring terminal on here. And what this does is it measures the temperature of the battery. There's a reed switch. Basically what it does is it picks up a magnet at the end of the screwdriver that they give you. It may seem a little Byzantine, but it works really well.
Welcome to the second in a two-part series on upgrading your boat's alternator and regulator. Hi, I'm Tom from LifeFourPointZero. This video covers the installation and configuration of the Balmar external regulator. If you haven't watched part 1 of this series yet, be sure to go back and check that video out first, as it covers some important upgrading details, particularly for boaters with a stock Yanmar alternator. This video is a step-by-step guide to installing Balmar's ARS-5 regulator. Balmar also makes the closely related MC612, 614, and 624 regulators, and this video will help you with installing those units as well. Okay, so let's go on board Zeros and get started.
So citing the location for this, you want it close to your battery switches. This is a battery isolator, so it's helpful to locate it close to that. And also it's got a nice run into here, into the engine room, a short distance. So I'm going to put it right here, although I have to move this solar regulator over a little bit to make room to mount this guy. So I'm going to do that. Okay, I'm ready now. I've got the solar charge controller moved over so I have room to mount my Balmar regulator. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. 4 holes here. I'm going to take one hole and put this little plastic loop in here. It's going to actually hold a little LED warning light. So that's going to be there, and I'm just going to sort of force these holes in without drilling pilot holes. And the wood is soft enough here that I can do that. I'm also mounting this so that there's a little display here at the top, and next to it there's a little magnetic reed sensor, and you want that somewhere that's accessible so that you can configure the regulator for your battery type and other settings, and to be able to easily check for error messages. Okay, so there we go, we got it mounted, and then we'll move on to connecting all the wires up. So normally when you buy a regulator, or at least as an option from Balmar when you buy a regulator, is to get their wiring harness. This was a spare regulator that I had, so I didn't have the wiring harness to go with it. I made up my own wires and spade fittings to fit on these terminals, but it's a good idea to get the wiring harness because it saves you a little bit of work. So you'll see me running wires here that may not be the exact colors that you have from the factory wiring harness, but they accomplish the same thing. Okay, so the first wire to hook up here is this black number 1 ground wire that goes on the number 1 terminal, the very top of the regulator. Well, I shouldn't say top, but it's the first terminal on this left-hand side. So that's a ground wire. In my situation, since I'm making up my own wiring instead of the factory wire harness, I have a yellow one, but that's going to run to the ground on the alternator. So I'm just going to slide this one on there like that. I'm going to have a whole bunch of wires run over into the engine compartment, so I'm just going to kind of feed this through, but I won't actually finish up the wiring completely and zip tying and all that and making it look pretty until the end. So I'm going to probably end up zip tying it along this other cable run right here, so I'll leave enough slack to be able to zip tie it onto there. So I can go anywhere and ground this. I could ground it right to the alternator. I'm just actually going to ground it right to here. This is the part of the mechanism for grounding wires for the starter, but also this big heavy black cable that probably goes over to the negative switch. But I'm just going to go ahead and jump on top of this grounding terminal here and put it on there. Okay, so to strip this wire off, and I'm going to put a ring terminal on here. There we go. And crimp this guy down. There's pink, blue, and yellow settings here for crimp size. This is a blue conductor. And so I put it on the blue. And this is a crimper where you squeeze it tight enough to the point where it'll release the pliers for you, so you know you've got it tight enough. So I can go ahead and put that on here and tighten back down. Okay, that's snug there. So again, I'm going to do all my zip tying when I'm all done here. But that's the first one. That's the ground wire. Okay, I'm ready to move on to installing red number 2 power wire here. And that's this assemblage here. So it's got red power number 2. It basically goes to the positive side of the battery. Now it notes here that when a diode type battery isolator is used, the power wire must be connected to the battery side of the battery isolator. Now I do have the battery isolators on the boat. I don't know if it's a diode based one or not, so to be safe I'm going to attach it to the battery side, which is this house output. So this heavier cable comes from the alternator, so charging current comes in here, and it goes to the house. It goes this other lug over here, which is engine battery, and there's a third one wired up here that's not currently used, but I think it's probably for like a bow thruster battery or a windlass battery. And so I'm going to hook up this red power wire to this side, which is effectively the same as the house battery bank voltage. So I'm going to tap into that ring terminal, or I'm going to put a ring terminal to connect to there. Now this one also comes with a fuse. It's got a 10 amp fuse, so that protects the regulator, external regulator, from any kind of surges. And I've also connected up in this, I made up a little LED light here for this step here, installed dash lamp, and then this little wire connects to the post number 11 on the regulator down here at the very bottom. That's an optional thing. It'll flash if there's like alternators too high temperature, batteries too high temperature, etc. So that's what I'm going to have just sort of strapped here to this little plastic connector, just to have a place to see if there's any I wouldn't say error messages, but warning messages that the regulator is putting out. Alright, so this one attaches to the number 2 position right below the first wire we put on. There we go, it slides in nicely. And while I'm here, I'm going to attach the dash lamp to number 11, which is all the way down on the bottom. Okay, so that LED dash lamp is there, and I'm just going to give myself enough length on this red line, red wire, so it doesn't put too much pressure on there, but all it has to do is come up to this connector on the isolator, so it doesn't need a lot of length. There we are, all set there. So this is going to be live. I haven't turned off the house battery side because I got refrigerators going and that kind of thing. So that's going, I got to be careful when I take this wire off that this doesn't lay down and hit something that's negative. It's important when you hook up this power wire to the regulator that it's not on the switched side, downstream of a battery switch or whatever, because then you can inadvertently shut down the regulator suddenly if somebody were to turn off the house battery switch here. And then that sudden change to the alternator output can damage the alternator, the diodes in the alternator. So that's something to consider. Okay, so that's the power wire. I'm ready to move on to number 3 here, the install brown number 3 ignition wire. In my wiring setup, it's a white wire, but this goes to the ignition on the engine. So the other end of the wire is fitted with a butt connector. Typically the ignition wire is connected to the on side of the ignition switch. This may be at the actual switch or to the wire in the existing engine wiring loom that delivers switched voltage from the ignition switch. So really all this is doing is to making sure that the regulator gets power only when the ignition switch is on the engine. So when you turn the engine off, you don't want the regulators to still be staying on and trying to do something. So this there was a ignition wire that came off of the old wiring on the alternator, so I'm going to tap right into that. So again, this is the number 3, typically brown in the factory wiring harness, and in mine it's white, and it goes to position 3 down here, which is the next step down below the other wires I've already put on. So that one goes on there. And again, this is going to run into the engine room. So again, give yourself plenty of extra slack on the wiring so that you can have enough to safely zip tie it and not have any strain on the wire. So I'm going to run right up along this cabling that goes over to the alternator. Okay, I'm all done with the ignition wire. That's this white wire in my configuration, brown wire otherwise, and it's hooked up to the ignition wire that we took off when we put the smart regulator inside of the alternator. So that's all set for that. Okay, there's this wire that's a red wire that came off of the new regulator that went into the alternator. It's called a red sensing wire. It's really to, if you want to set up to be able to go back to having the alternator be internally regulated. I'm going to just, and they say that if you don't want to have that set up, you can just tape this off. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to bother to try to have a backup of flipping back to the old regulator. I've got enough wiring to get done today, so I'm not going to bother with all those options. Okay, now we're ready to move on to the field wire. That's this number 4 wire that's blue in the factory harness. In mine, it's going to be a gray wire. So this one connects to the field terminal on the new regulator inside of the alternator. So this goes in number 4 position. We'll mount that here. Again, kind of working our way down on the external regulator here. And this will go into the engine compartment. Okay, so the field wire goes up onto the field terminal, which is the lower of these 2 studs. The upper one's the ignition and is not used. When you look at the instructions, it says that that terminal will be vacant. So I'm going to put a ring terminal on this and attach it to the field terminal. The field terminal is what energizes the alternator and regulates how much the alternator outputs. So it's a pretty important part in the whole solution. Okay, we're all set. We have the field wire on this lower stud. Ignition stud is empty. At this point, we've got all the primary wires that the regulator would need. I'm going to go ahead and hook up some additional ones, like the sense the battery temperature and sense the alternator temperature. I've got those wires, and I'm going to go ahead and add those to the regulator setup. Okay, the next step is installing the battery temperature sensor. It goes on posts 5 and 6. This is an optional thing. You can buy the temperature sensor assembly from Balmar. It's this part MC-TS-B. So it's got 2 pieces here that go on the regulator, positive and negative. Number 5 positive, number 6 negative. That's these posts here, which are right at the first pair here. So I'm going to go ahead and connect those up. Red on number 5 and black on number 6. And it's got a long wiring run here. I think maybe 20 feet or so, much more than I need, but I'm passing it through here onto the other side where we have the battery bank underneath the other berth. So I'll go ahead and hook that up. And you attach the sensor lug to the negative post closest to the center of the battery bank. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so I've got the battery bank area all opened up here. We've got 6 batteries, 4 batteries here and 2 behind over there. I'm just going to mount it to kind of the center area. And what this does is it measures the temperature of the battery, and if the batteries get too hot, it slows down the amperage to the battery bank so that the batteries don't overheat, and therefore it kind of just helps them if you're sailing in really warm climates, or for whatever reason you're pumping a lot of amps into the battery bank and the batteries are getting too hot from it, it slows it down to save the batteries. Whenever you're working on batteries and hand tools, just be very careful. You got a negative and a positive post. If you were to connect the two with a wrench, which I've done, it sends up a big spark and it's dangerous. So just be careful with that. Tight. Okay, moving on, we're going to do the alternator temperature sensor. Similar to the battery sensor, this one tests for or monitors for if the alternator is getting hot, if it's putting out too many amps and just overheating. And likewise, it also turns down the alternator output. So this is another optional thing. You don't need it. The alternator, the regulator will work fine without it. It's just another safety measure. MC-TS-A. And similar to the battery monitor, it's got 2 leads, positive and negative, and then it's got a lug here on the end. So this says connect the sensor lug to the terminal provided, 6 series, or one of the 4 bolts that hold the alternator's front and rear cases together. Extend sensor cable to the regulator. The cable can be included within the regulator's wiring harness or can run alongside. And then the positive and negative terminals go to number 9 and 10. So I'm going to go ahead and hook up those positive and negative terminals. 9 and 10 is the last pair in the row here, right above number 11, which is the dash lamp. There we go. Okay, so now I've got this is the alternator sensing wire right here. It's attached to this bolt here. So this is one of 4 bolts that hold the whole case of the alternator together. So I took that off. It had the most room around it to hold this sensing lug. So not perfect because it's kind of sticking out here. I'd rather have it down below, but that other bolt down there didn't seem like it would have enough room around it. So that'll sense the temperature of the alternator and it'll dial it back down if it gets too hot. Okay, the last step in this whole setup is programming the external regulator. So there are instructions here in the manual. There's really the key thing is setting up your battery type, which is under here, this basic battery programming. And our batteries are AGMs down here, so that's the one I'm going to set. But you want to, if you've got flooded batteries or gel batteries or whatever, you're going to want to set up the correct battery type, and that will drive the voltage. Find it here. So it's got this profile set up, like for AGM batteries, it starts off at 14.38 volts for 18 minutes. Now, if you had gels, it would only do 4.1. Flooded cells would be 14.6. And there's a whole different set of schemes here of how long and at what voltage it does the bulk absorption and float cycles at. So it's really important you set up your correct battery type so that it takes advantage of your battery chemistry and also doesn't damage your battery by overcharging or over voltage of it. So the way it's done on these is that there's this there's a reed switch. Basically what it does is it picks up a magnet on the end of the screwdriver that they give you. It may seem a little Byzantine, but it works really well, and it allows them to have basically a product that doesn't have any place where water can get into. So you hold the magnet over on the left-hand side from the display. There's a 3-digit display here, and you hold it on the left-hand side, and when you do that, there's a little red dot that will appear that recognizes it. Okay, I've sensed there's a magnet there. And so whenever you read through the instructions, there's instructions to say either hold the magnet or release it, or just a kind of a quick touch and go kind of thing. The way these instructions read is that to set up the basic programming is to hold the magnet to the red dot, and then it's going to cycle through Pro to BA to then do an LED display of the different battery types. I'm going to look for AGL. I'm explaining this to you now because I'm going to start up the, turn the engine on, and you may not be able to hear as much, but you'll see those things go on. It goes through a basic display process initially, as shown up here. BAL for Balmar, A5 for ARS-5. It shows the default. It's going to show default universal factory program. That's what part I'm going to change. And then it goes through all these other settings about battery temperature and alternator temperature. And when I hold the read switch over and I get a red dot, here's a touch and hold, the letters will change to Pro, and then they'll change to BA, and then I'm going to look for the AGL. And when I see that, then I release the magnet from the display, and then I know that I've got it programmed. So that's the process. Okay, so I'm back here now. I've turned it on. It's already started to cycle through some of those settings. B1 is the battery temperature, 24C. AL is the alternator temperature, about 30C. And BAL, so it's cycling through. That's the Balmar, the A5. UFP is the current default program, and so forth. So now when I hold this over here, you'll see a little red light, and it's going to Pro, and then to BA, and now I'm going to look for the battery type. Not UFP, not flooded, not gel, but when I see AGL, I let go. BEL is the belt load manager, if you want to set that. When I read the instructions, it didn't apply to our alternator. It's going to go through here and keep cycling through, I believe, 3 times until it starts back up again. There's a whole bunch of advanced programming features that you can do. I don't really bother with that. I did that on our last boat just to get a certain voltage within their suggested cycle. But for this configuration, I'm not concerned about that. Okay, save. And now it's starting over again and rebooting. A5. BU is battery voltage 12.8. CU is calculated voltage, not sure what that means, but 13.7. B1 is battery temperature, again 24C. So this is kind of the standard display that it cycles through. It's called the short display, and it's going to come back to Balmar and A5. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the engine, and we'll look at what it shows there. And it should go into bulk mode for charging.
The engine is running now, and you can see the regulator cycling through the settings we just programmed. The AGM battery type, the no belt load manager, and it's starting the bulk charge stage. The battery voltage, which is currently at 13.4 volts. The calculated or target voltage, which is set at 14.4 as programmed for the bulk stage. And the battery temperature at 24 degrees C. And finally, the alternator temperature, which is currently at 40 degrees C. Okay, so that wraps up the installation of the Smart Ready Retrofit kit for Yanmar alternators from Balmar, and also the ARS-5 external regulator from Balmar, and tying the two together. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you saw that it's actually pretty straightforward to install both of those products. Obviously I ran into some delays with having to move the alternator out of the way to be able to reach the casing on the back, and having to remove the belt and all that stuff.
so it was longer than 30 minutes for that part. And then there was a couple hours of installing the external regulator and doing all the wiring. You'll make your job easier if you buy the wiring harness from Balmar. I had a little more work to wire up my own harness, so that will be a little bit of a time saver for you. And you could choose not to do the alternator temperature sensor and battery temperature sensor, although I would recommend doing it while you're in there and doing all the wiring. It's not a lot more money for those additional kits, and it gives you some peace of mind when your engine is busy charging up your batteries. So it's a great upgrade. It really helps your batteries last longer. It's the most efficient way to charge your battery bank without overcharging and without going into like an absorption mode too soon. So that three-stage process is really critical for battery life. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Look forward to your comments as always, and we'll be doing more how-to videos in the future. Take care.